Hey everyone, it's Rena Jadov with Dr. Peter Osborne, and we are talking about the book masterclass No Grain, No Pain. And this is the chapter on obesity, pain caused by grain obesity. Dr. Osborne, is there a connection between grain and weight issues?
Absolutely. If you ask any farmer what's the quickest way to fatten up their cows, they're going to tell you to feed them more grain. What's the quickest way to fatten up the pig? More grain. The quickest way to fatten up the chicken? More grain. So there's a connection in farming, and there's certainly a connection in humans. And one of the reasons why that connection exists is because a lot of the grain-based products that are out there, aside from gluten sensitivity, a lot of them are super, super high in sugar and carbohydrate. The processed ones, particularly without much fiber. And so what happens is that person eats those sugars in mass quantities because, our food guide pyramid and most doctors will tell you your diet should be 60 to 70% carbohydrate. And so people are eating bread, pasta, cereal, donuts, thinking, I am getting grain. It's good for me. It's vegetarian, right? No, it's not. It's all that excessive carbohydrate does nothing but convert to triglycerides inside your body. So if you're over consuming carbs, what happens to those carbs is your body converts them to fat. That's what a triglyceride is. And then you start storing them. Now, the other component, and we talked about this earlier, is we talked about grain creating inflammation. And one of the side effects of inflammation is a hormone called cortisol. Now, important note here, cortisol, if you inject somebody with cortisol or if somebody takes an oral corticosteroid hormone, what does it do? It causes them to swell. It causes them to get puffy. It causes them to retain water. It causes them to gain weight. If you're eating a food every day that causes your body to make more cortisol, you're going to gain the weight too. And what happens when a person gains weight? Their joints hurt more because they're carrying more on their shoulders. They're carrying more on their knees. They're carrying more in their hips. So then as they're gaining weight, they don't want to exercise, right? Because it hurts to exercise. So they get stuck in this vicious cycle of weight gain caused by overconsumption of grain. Then they're ending up in pain. Then they avoid exercise. Now when they're avoiding exercise, they gain even more weight, and the cycle never stops. And then where doctors come in is they give a drug, right? They give a pain medication. And unfortunately, the pain medications, and I'm going to go back to the last chapter, the pain medications, particularly things like ibuprofen, naproxen, so the nonsteroidals, cause leaky gut. That's one of the other causes of leaky gut. So then that sets the stage for pain induced by autoimmunity. So you can see where just creating one problem and trying to solve it with a medicine without ascertaining the origin of the issue can create a new problem that makes the first problem even worse.
And that's why we have the epidemic that we do. I mean, that's why we have literally millions of people sick with chronic illness, because we haven't figured out how to address the root cause of it. So, which is why thank you so much for, again, writing this book and helping people to understand what the root cause might be. Now, you say, carbs convert, grains convert to sugar, that creates an issue. I was able to do 15 months with no grains, but I think for the rest of the world, they're horrified at the thought of having even a day without some grains. So of the grains that are out there, what is the least harmful one? Like if you were going to eat a grain, of all the grains out there, what is the one grain you'd say, all right, if you're going to do an exception, that's the grain I recommend?
It's a great question, but I don't deal with exceptions. I do deal with absolutes because exceptions lead to slippery slopes. And if you give a person permission to cheat on the diet with one thing, then the next thing that happens is they say, well, this one can't be that bad either. And then that slowly trickles back in. So again, I go back to testing. If you're genetically gluten sensitive, there is no exception to the rule. If you're not genetically gluten sensitive and you're just saying, what kind of grain can I eat? You just want to make sure that whichever one you're choosing is organic, from heirloom seed, and it's being properly produced where it's the whole grain in its sprouted form, okay? Otherwise, what happens is you're getting a highly processed grain with other additives and other dough conditioners and other chemicals, and that's not good for you.
Right. But you're not going to pick say, teff is better or and seeds are different from grains, right? I want to, again, clarify this because I know I used to get confused between what's a grain and what's a seed. And I used to wonder, hey, is chia a grain? And chia is actually a seed. And you're saying seeds are okay, right?
They can be and they can't be. So from this perspective, well, let me answer the first question. All grains are seeds. Not all seeds are grains. Grains are defined as the seeds of grass, okay? So that's the differentiation. Now, to answer your second question, are other seeds potential problems? Every seed that we know of has human poisons. Every one. Now, lots of foods have human poisons. Spinach has human poisons. So I don't want to scare people away from food and create a food phobia. I just want you to understand that when people gravitate towards seed as a staple food in their diet, massive quantities of chia, massive quantities of flax, right? We hear about these superfoods.
Yes.
Okay. What ends up happening is understand that the seed does not want to be your food, right? The seed is a life form. It wants to continue the propagation of its own species, not be eradicated by human mouths, right? So inside of every seed lives specialized proteins that are designed to protect the seed from predators. We look at apple seed, for example. We can extract cyanide poison from apple seeds and peach seeds or peach pits, right? There are a number of different types of poisons, arsenic and cyanide and other poisons that we find in all seeds universally. So if you're eating them, it can make your stomach upset and it can make you want to vomit. It can make you have diarrhea, right? So I don't recommend, when people are going through no grain, no pain, I don't recommend seeds for the first several months, just if their guts are already in disarray, because seeds are hard to digest, right? And if we've got a gut that's already compromised, let me give you another analogy. If your muscles are super sore, right, because you worked out yesterday, and they're so sore you can barely walk, you're not going to go to the gym and do more exercise today. You're going to take a little time off and let them recover and heal, right? What's the same thing with your gut? If your gut is so sore because it's been damaged by years of gluten exposure or years of doing and eating the wrong foods, if you put a bunch of seed-based food in it and you try to get the gut that's already compromised to digest those seeds, it's just going to struggle and have a harder time.
That makes a lot of sense. What about hormones? Before we started recording, you had talked about the connection between grains and hormones, and I joked about the fact that, yes, you know, women over 40 like me, we notice that we can't tolerate grains as much. If you could shed a little light on that.
So there's several hormones that grain can affect. There's studies that show that grain can affect prolactin, a hormone made in the brain. And prolactin is important for pregnancy, right? It's important for breastfeeding. A lot of women who lose their breast milk too soon because they're potentially over-consuming grain and creating a prolactin problem. We also sometimes will see estrogen and progesterone disruption in people with grain sensitivity. We know that grain can affect the thyroid. Gluten particularly can affect the thyroid, creating an autoimmune response in the thyroid called Hashimoto's and Graves' disease.
Which is huge, which is, again, it's another epidemic now. It's apparently the #1 diagnosed autoimmune disease for women.
It is, and it's goes back and forth between, like, the first and the second most common prescription drug is thyroid medication. You know, pain and thyroid medication kind of.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, it's a very common medication. So then we have, other hormone disruption, and two in particular, and these are the two most common: cortisol and insulin. Too much grain and creation of inflammation causes the body to overproduce cortisol, which then leads to hyper weight gain, muscle loss, bone loss. It also leads to an excessive insulin response. Remember, insulin's job is to regulate blood sugar. And what did I say earlier about grain? It's high in sugar. So we eat all this excessive carbohydrate, then our pancreas has to overproduce insulin to keep up and compensate. And when we make so much insulin over time, that's what people, that's the first step in diabetes, right? By the time a person develops diabetes, their insulin levels have gone down, not up. But pre-diabetes is their insulin is way up. Okay, so their insulin levels are compensating for their bad diet choices, but as their bad diet choices continue to persist, their pancreas gets tired. Oh, wow. Okay, it only has so much reserve, and then the insulin levels start to drop, and we end up with diabetes,
which is yet another huge crisis in this country. So